And then in the third week, it not only sank, it lost its potency. Experiment abandoned. That was not the end of the affair. V.W. Proctor, another botanist, said, birds flew from Africa with the cotton to America. Birds, you know, not blacks. And I want you to understand why they could not consider blacks. Because all the anthropological studies of blacks have been dealing with primitives or semi-primitives or little rural villages or simple people on the edge of the African cultural centers. Everybody does not operate at the same technological level. I know that from Europe. I spent 10.5 years in Europe. You think Europe is one place? It is very different. Like Africa. It is more advanced today than Africa is because we know why. We don't have to ask such silly questions. You can't take millions of people out of a continent, exploit it, take out of all its raw material for hundreds of years, misinform people, reduce them to a state of semi-starvation in many places, take the best minds out of the country, rip millions of people out of the heart and belly of the country, and then said, I wonder what happened to Africa. But in spite of that devastation, we have been able to go back and find things. Within the last 10 to 20 years, so much has been found in Africa that we suddenly begin to pause and realize we have to take off the blindfolds of this civilization. Not only was Star Ceti discovered in 1978 rather, two American scientists, Peter Schmidt and Donald Avery of Brown University in Rhode Island, discovered Africans were smelting steel 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. Now that in itself is only surprising because it's Africa. Other people were smelting steel too. Not many. But what was shocking was to find the Africans were not merely smelting steel. They were smelting the finest bloom of carbon steel at temperatures of 1,850 degrees centigrade, which is 200 degrees higher than anything achieved in Europe until the 19th century. They were doing this in the 5th, using the most modest dates, the 5th century AD. In other words, 1,000 years before Europe reached 1850, they had reached 1850. Secondly, they discovered the Africans were smelting steel in a single-stage process. Even when George Wilhelm Siemens, the German, in the middle of the 20th century, discovered a process for mass-producing steel, it was done in two crude processes. First, the sintering of solid particles, and then stage 2, in order to bring it to the fine bloom of carbon steel. The Africans jumped that stage because they had learned to produce iron crystals, which involves a semiconductor technology unknown until the 20th century. And then on top of that, they discovered again to their astonishment that the Africans were doing this using less fuel. They had been driven into fuel-saving technology because they did not have as much wood at their disposal. How could that be when Africa has such vast jungles? United Nations report Africa has less jungle than any other continent comparable with its land space. By that is meant, if you took 2 Europes, and you could put 2 Europes in Africa, if you left out Soviet Asia, not Soviet Europe, but Soviet Asia, you could put 2 Europes in Africa. There's more woodland and forest in that comparable land space of 2 Europes than in Africa. My jungle, I come from Guyana, which is no jungle in itself. It has very sophisticated cities on the coast, but 85% of it is jungle. My country is larger than Britain, Scotland, and Wales put together. You could take a big city like London and bury it in my jungle, and you wouldn't see it from the air. Okay, it's larger than any single jungle in Africa. But we get this impression about these great jungles. Ethiopia and Egypt and Carthage in the Hannibal period, and Mali and Songhai, and Monomotapa, and Ghana. Those were not jungle empires. In one of those empires in Mali, which they call the Bright Country, vast savanna country, as large as all the states of Western Europe put together, according to what the Arabs said who had traveled through it. There was not a single slice of jungle. The Africans there were so afraid of the jungle that when they traded with the jungle Africans, they would take their goods and put it on the edge of the jungle, and the Africans would come out and give them something its equivalent. And then they would come and pick it up and go away with it. Not jungle empires. Let's get this very straight. So we have this fascination. These anthropologists had this fascination. There was I in the university, and I didn't get to university easy. Here in America, everybody gets their BA at 22, except a few slackers. I got it at 32, and I wasn't slacking. There was no university in my country. I couldn't go to university. At age 16, I had finished all my exams. There was nothing else to do. I sat it again at 17, and I sat it again at 18. At 16, I got 75. At 17, I got 80. At 18, I got 82. What do you think I was doing? I was trying to get as close to 100 as I can, because only those people in the 90s can get scholarships to go to university. One scholarship a year to go to university. So if you don't come first for the whole country, you don't go to university. And I see people here, young people, 28, 30, just kids. That's no age. People live until they're 70 and 90 in parts of my country, like in the jungles. You live until you're 30 and you die. And people come here and they're little, very young people and talk about they lost their chance. They can't educate themselves anymore. Pythagoras spent 22 years among the Egyptians before he finished his education. And I went out into that world, and I was so proud. After I was 28, I got into the university. I got a scholarship to go to British University. And it was the best university in the world for studying African studies, so I was told. And I was very naive and thought, what, how marvelous. And there were my teachers, world professors. They were world-renowned professors, and after 2 years you began to realize it was easy to become a world-renowned professor, because all you had to do was to pick out something that nobody else picked out. And the only way to do that is to find an irrelevant, insignificant tribe. We all pick tribes, okay? If a tribe is vanishing and it is very far and it is in the deeps of the jungle or the desert and nobody wants to go there for a year, you pick it out. You'll be the world-famous professor, because you would be an expert on the wooga-booga. Because nobody gives a damn about wooga-boogas. And we have thousands of studies like that, and these people try to extrapolate from these little simplicities what is essentially and quintessentially African. And you cannot do that. I could not do that with my little village. My village is irrelevant to my development. It was critical in a sense, because I do not despise my people. But you could not study my village and get a sense of what my country was about. It was like two worlds. You could not study my village and get a sense of what the South American continent was about. No, sir. You wouldn't have a foggiest idea. Why, therefore, do people think you could go anywhere in Africa, pick on any little tribe, and come back and say, this is the African? That's why we found nothing of significance among Africans. That's why the myth of their inferiority prevailed. And then we started to find a whole lot of things, not only their steel smelting machines. The same year we found they had astronomical observatories 300 years before Jesus. It was found in Kenya at Namorotungo, where